All right, welcome to part two of the Fantasy Burn, Dynasty Pulse, and Undroppables collab. I'm here with my guest, Andrew Cooper, at Koopa Fiasco on Twitter. That's COOP, capital A, Fiasco. Tight end guru, tight end sharp, creator of the yin and yang tight end drafting system, which we got in. So go back and watch part one, get into that. Real quickly, I am drinking my coffee out of this cup, which I acquired when I went and saw the best tight end I've ever seen live in a college football game, and his name is Michael Mayer. He scored a touchdown against my Cal Bears at Notre Dame when my buddy and I went out there a couple years ago. So shout out Michael Mayer.
Delicious tight end juice.
Yeah. So with that, I want to ask you two questions. Why is Michael Mayer going to be a top 5 tight end this season? And why is McAllen Castles the tight end one of this 2024 rookie class? Go.
Yeah, that's some loaded questions there, brother. We'll say this. So I have an article out. I actually wrote a couple years ago leading into Kyle Pitts' rookie year, because there was so much debate on whether a rookie tight end can be good or not, right? So I wrote what it takes to break out as a young tight end and why it's so difficult, right? And a lot of people say that it's a difficult position to learn, and that's true to some degree. But the biggest thing for these guys is that there's multiple hurdles compared to wide receiver. Most teams use 3 wide receivers on every play, right? So the cream rises to the top. If you have 3 or at least 2 wide receivers out there, the ability to earn targets is easily available. For tight end, especially as a rookie, the first thing you need to do is you need to come in and become the best pass catching tight end on the team, because tight end is a room and there's almost always incumbents in the room. In fact, there always is. So even if you're Cole Kmet coming into a room and Jimmy Graham is there, the tight end coach is going to look around the room and say, okay, who's going to do what? And he's never going to say, okay, Jimmy, you're going to put your hand in the dirt and block so that Cole Kmet can run routes. So that's the first hurdle, is that you need to look around that room and your guy needs to be the number one pass catching tight end on the team, right? And ideally, that will be enough to get him a full-time snap share, though that's actually not necessary, 100% necessary. I've seen Mark Andrews finish top 5 at tight end on only 40-something% snaps because he just ran every route, right? The next thing you need, the next hurdle, is to get that full route share, though. So you need to become the top pass catching tight end, which Michael Mayer did last year, right? So the first thing he needs to do, checkbox 1, surpass Austin Hooper as the top route runner, which he did. The second one is to become a guy that runs every route or nearly every route, which he hasn't done that yet. But now that Austin Hooper's gone and he's the full-time starter, and they brought in Harrison Bryant as the backup blocking tight end, I think this is the year where he does run a full route share. So he checks the next box. The third box to upside is to become a top 2 target on the team. And while they have Devonta Adams and Jacoby Myers, that could be difficult. The bet you need, obviously he's not going to surpass Devonta Adams. The bet in so many cases is looking at these teams and saying, is this tight end going to get more targets than that player? And with Jacoby Myers, you could make an argument. You could make an argument. I'm not quite ready to make it, but the argument could be made. So Michael Mayer, you're waiting for that window of opportunity for him. With a guy like Kyle Pitts, he was drafted. He immediately became a top 2 target on the team. He was the best pass catching tight end on the team immediately. And he was playing a full snap share, and that's why he had 1,000 yards with Matt Ryan, right? And the only times that I've actually been in on tight ends as rookies was Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, and then this past year, I was in on both Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporte, right? It's just so rare that a team says this guy is immediately going to be one of our best 2 pass catchers. That's why it doesn't happen. So that's what we're looking for, right? And we might get it again this year with Brock Bowers, depending where he ends up.
Right. And it was more of a tongue-in-cheek question about Michael Mayer. I'm rooting for him. Friend of the show, Kenny King Jr., who's a Raiders insider, said that one of his offensive player to break out this season is going to be Michael Mayer. But I wanted to talk real quickly because you kind of brought it up, and there is a changing landscape in terms of tight end participation in the offense in the NFL. And traditionally, there have been 2 kinds of tight ends. There was a blocking tight end, and then there was a tight end that was more of an all-around. And so you didn't see breakouts in fantasy until later on when the the tight end became a competent blocker, started out sharing out, increasing his snap share over the other tight ends in the room, and that typically used to take a while. But what we're seeing now is these tight ends who are coming in and they're not being asked to block as much because
Right.
it's more of a vertical game than it used to be. And they don't need to be in there for chip blocking. They can line up as a big slot receiver and create a matchup problem for cornerbacks who are smaller and linebackers who are slower. Darren Waller was a perfect example of that a couple years ago. Travis Kelce is just an absolute monster. Route runner, too strong, very fast, like totally an enigmatic goat in the class. Um, so this is probably going to be a permanent thing. Talk to me about the changing landscape of tight ends, the fact that you can have a blocking tight end to come in on certain downs and then have basically a big wide receiver or big ass wide receiver.
Right. So the first thing we do is you kind of alluded to is we separate the blocking tight ends out and we try and just get rid of them. Like Drew Sample, drafted in the second round of the NFL draft, tricked a lot of people, but we knew he was going to be a blocking tight end based on his profile. You want to get the Michael Pruitts and Drew Samples and stuff out of your mind for fantasy football, right? For the every down two-way tight ends like Michael Mayer, they can have a slow start because it's hard to get that role, right? The same with like Tucker Kraft versus Luke Musgrave. He's going to be in line for the time being. Same with Dallas Goddard. You want to roster those guys, but you have to wait for the window. With the other guys, the guy you're talking about, basically what's happening is you with these guys, you need them to be as good as the slot wide receivers on the team at catching the football. If they're as good, that means they're going to get those snaps because they're a better blocker than every wide receiver in the league. That's what happens with Evan Engram. Is that Evan Engram? People say he's not a good blocker because when he lines up in line as tight end, he's not a good blocker. But when he lines up at wide receiver for 80% of his snaps, he's one of the best blocking wide receivers in the league, right? And there was someone that actually figured this out before everyone else. That is, in my opinion, kind of the father of this modern system, and that's actually Chan Gailey, right? So
Mm,
Chan Gailey, when he was with the Chiefs, way back, he had Tony Gonzalez, and he took him and put him in the slot. And that year, Tony Gonzalez, it was just 1 year. Tony Gonzalez ran the second most routes out of the slot of any player behind only Hines Ward. Behind only Hines Ward. And he was the tight end one by a mile. Right. And then with
right.
other coaches came in, they put him back in line and used him like a typical tight end. But like that was kind of that started this whole thing. And the problem with Chan Gailey for fantasy football purposes is that depending on what team he was with, he didn't always use a tight end for them. So with the Jets, you look at the seasons Eric Decker had with the Jets, 1,000-yard
Hmm.
seasons, 10 touchdown seasons as a big slot with Chan Gailey. That could have been a tight end. David Nelson with the Bills. Then when he went to the Dolphins, the one good year that Mike Gesicki had, the tight end sixth season, guess who was the offensive coordinator? Chan
Shane
Gailey.
Gailey.
And teams look around and they started using that. So if we could find the OCs that do that, we want to rally around whatever tight ends they have, especially if they're pegged for that role. So Doug Peterson used Zach Ertz like that, right? And that's what we got with Evan Engram. Here's a key and crucial landing spot for Dynasty is that with Greg Roman, Mark Andrews became a guy that was playing 85% of his snaps at wide receiver. He was blocking on less than 1% of pass plays at times, and he had a top five tight end season of all time under those conditions. Greg Roman is now the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, who just moved on from their top four best pass catchers in Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Gerald Everett. If that team spends up big on a rookie tight end, I mean, obviously the dream would be Brock Bowers at five.
Hmm.
But even if they trade back and take Bowers or take anybody else, that is a spot that because of the scheme and because of the opportunity, you have to move that player up. I don't care what your pre-draft analysis was, you have to move those guys up. And that's that's
Okay.
that's the way it rides, man. And I know, and I just want to throw this out there, just and I know I can be long-winded at times, but there's for me personally, I will do a ton of analysis pre-draft, but the guys that I respect most and where I model my process after, they are including draft capital heavily
Right.
in their models. You look at Dwayne McFarland, the number one in his prospect model, the number one most heavily weighted category is draft capital. You look at JJ Zachariason, the number one most weighted uh, category in his model is draft capital. So you cannot ignore draft capital or landing spot with this particular position.
Right. And kind of it's similar with wide receivers. There, we have the umbrella of analytics. We have the film grinding and everything, and those kind of inform the landing spot, right? So like you can have a guy who looks all world like Treylon Burks, but if he goes into a bad situation, things just aren't going to work out for him. And everybody's going to have some, like, I hear people like going, but Treylon Burks didn't have a big route tree. Right. That's not the point. He had a whole ton of metrics that pointed to him as a wide receiver one, and he got into a bad situation. He had injuries and everything. And then year two, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. And then year three, they went out and got Calvin Ridley. Right. So it's just this cascade of him not being able to reach his potential. And you see that at the tight end position as well. There are guys who are out there that coming out of college were like, this guy can be it. Kyle Pitts, huge rookie season, and then just kind of disappeared because of the situation that he was in.
You see some guys that with a tight end will take years to break out. Like Delaney Walker, the 49ers drafted Vernon Davis, and the same draft later in the draft drafted Delaney Walker. And because
he didn't break out until he was a Titan.
Until he was 30, right? And because of the styles of play, Vernon Davis being this freak, they put him at the pass catcher and Delaney Walker as the blocker. But they didn't, the whole time didn't really realize that this guy, when given a chance to shine in that pass catching role, he had, back to back 1,000-yard seasons with like Marcus Mariota. Like Delaney Walker, the entire time could have been a better player, but he was stuck, right? Same with guys like Pat Freiermuth, who you alluded to earlier or on the previous show. Basically, this is a guy where, have you ever heard someone say Pat Freiermuth stinks or Pat Freiermuth isn't good?
Right.
I searched it on Twitter the other day, and I couldn't find. I found like one dude who was just mad about some individual drop in a game. Nobody said that. Right?
Probably like, Luke Sawhook.
Right, yeah, he's just like, this sucks, right? But like, this guy sucks. But no one is saying Pat Freiermuth isn't good. The situation's been bad. So like, those are the guys you want to stash in Dynasty, waiting for that window of opportunity to open.
Well, real quickly, I have 3 tight end stories that I think you'll find impressive. Number 1, Brock Bowers. I already told you about that. On the other side, I fed him pizza, Napa High School. Number 2, I grew up with this kid, and he was all section tight end for our high school team. And when we were playing basketball in junior high, I knew that he was the kind of guy that wasn't really going to do much because he had the talent and the physicality, but he didn't have the work ethic. So we'd be doing like Indian sprints. If you've ever done an Indian sprint, it's the whole team lines up and starts running around the track. Coach blows the whistle and the person in the back sprints up to the front of the line. And you just do that. And it's used as conditioning. It's also used as punishment, where the coach will not stop you from running for 2 or 3 miles, whatever. So we're doing this, and the coach is like kind of sitting in a chair off to the side of the football field and blowing the whistle. And this kid, every time we'd get around to the other side of the field, he would drop into the little ditch in the corner of the drainage part of the field and wait for the team to come around before the coach blew his whistle again. And we're like, okay, this kid, every time we had to do
what a hilarious move though.
right. And he like every time we had to go do something, he'd my knees bother me, whatever. He'd never put in the work. But he was 6 inches taller than everybody from 6 years old until high school. He would hit home runs that in like as 6-year-olds that we like couldn't believe. Goes and he's our tight end on our high school football team, becomes all league, gets a full ride scholarship to Berkeley, goes to Berkeley. He's set to become like an ascendant star. Year 1, he redshirts. Year 2, he comes out, loses his job to freshman Tony Gonzalez.
Yeah, that'll happen.
And that guy became Tony Gonzalez. And then finally, third story, same high school, couple of years ahead of us, we had a kid who his name is Jason Fisk. He played defensive tackle for the Chargers, Vikings, Titans, won a Super Bowl ring. Hometown hero. I grew up with his younger brother. Good friends with his other younger brother. He's got a son. His son went to Stanford to follow in his dad's footsteps, drafted, switched from defensive end, I think, to tight end, drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. Now he's the third string Atlanta Falcons tight end. His name is Tucker Fisk.
Okay.
And last year, I got Red Zone on, and I'm kind of like watching other games, but listening. And the Falcons game is on, and I hear and Tucker Fisk catches, and I've been waiting for this kid for 2 years to do something. He caught 3 passes last year, and I was like, Tucker, hometown guy. His uncle shops shops at my grocery store. His dad is there, and like, yeah.
That's
So Tucker
awesome, man.
Fisk and Tony Gonzalez and Brock Bowers.
That's incredible, man. Yeah,
A
I
lot of
mean, that's dude,
connections.
work ethic. At the end of the day, that is a big differentiator between some of these guys, where it's like truly the difference between like Randy Moss, in my opinion, could have been the greatest wide receiver of all time if he had the work ethic of Jerry Rice.
Jay Rice,
But
right?
it was kind of by the time he truly matured and got with Tom Brady and everything and kind of figured that out, it was kind of too late. You know what I mean? Like he was just incredible athlete, and had you put Jerry Rice's work ethic into Randy Moss, there would have been no question. But I mean, that's the great separator between guys like Larry Fitzgerald and Steve Smith that play forever, and some of these other guys who, you know, kind of fall off because they have issues or they don't stick with it, man. So and it's so tough in Dynasty. That's something that I've gone back and forth on in Dynasty, and that like personally behind the scenes, I'll factor that in, but it's so difficult for me to be like, hey, maybe this guy isn't going to have longevity in this league because of the way he moves and the way he operates.
Right.
And it's so difficult to say. I mean, it's easy to say with like an Austin Safarian Jenkins or a Michael Floyd, where it's in your face and obvious that they have issues or whatever. You know what I mean? Or a Monty Ball or
Dexter
much
Manley.
right. Like it's like with that, it's easy to be like, well, yeah, we're going to move away from this guy. But for some of these guys, it's such a in dynasty, such a difficult thing to broach, and something that I personally, that's kind of where I draw the line in creating content. I'm not going to be like, hey, you got to trade this guy in your dynasty league because I think he's a drunk, because that's such a difficult, it's such a difficult topic to get into. And I think for us, there a line needs to be drawn between personal and whatnot. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
something to keep in mind when you hear from these guys, like just listen to what's being said about them regarding worth ethic or this or that, or vice versa. And if you're hearing bad things, like we were always hearing with Jamarcus Russell, maybe you want to get out.
I was a psychiatric counselor in my career, so I'm gonna put my counselor hat on real quick. Backtrack to Randy Moss, and I'm gonna say that there was a touch of conduct disorder there that probably played into it. And with conduct disorder, oppositional personality disorder, or oppositional defiant disorder, your first instinct when somebody tells you to do something is to not do it.
Right.
And so his work ethic, I don't think that he didn't work. I think that if something was expected of him, his attitude was "fuck you,"
Right.
and that kind of like led him down a path of not doing the work that he needed to
Not doing
do.
the right thing. Right.
And Jerry Rice was not that guy.
The
Um,
opposite.
so let's get into the 2024 rookie tight ends real quick. So there are a few guys who are out there. There's definitely a number one, and that's Brock Bowers. Uh, Jatavian Sanders was kind of steamed up going into the draft season. Blake Sonat has kind of gotten a little bit more talk. Who are the three, the non Brock Bowers? Who are the
On
three
Bowers.
standouts of this class?
Yeah, so for me, like you gotta, I like to categorize players at this stage, right? And I do it with wide receivers, I do it with running backs too. To the best of my ability, categorize what type of player they can be, and then we can see what can. Obviously, draft capital is going to be huge no matter what, but then we can figure out what conditions these guys need to thrive. We talked about blocking tight ends versus two-way tight ends versus slot tight ends, and even further, I'll try and to figure out what their comps might be. So Jatavian Sanders is a guy I'm definitely interested in, and for me, the comp for him, the comps for him, the player type for him are the like Zach Ertz, Hunter Henry type players, right? And
Shout
with
out
these,
Razorbacks.
Shout out Razorbacks, Arkansas, baby. So you look at these guys, and at tight end, more than any other position, uh, oddly, long speed matters. And a lot of people these days like to say that like 40 time doesn't matter, this or that, which at wide receiver and running back, honestly, that
That's true.
that can't be true, right? But at tight end, because of the short amount of targets a lot of these guys get, and the fact that very rarely do guys get like 140, 150 targets like wide receivers, your ability to break off chunk plays, to turn shallow plays into big plays is a big separator between the middle of the pack guys. Like George Kittle running a 4.52. There's a reason he has more 40 plus yard plays, and he's the only guy to have multiple 70 plus yard plays as a tight end, right? And he even has like an 80-yard touchdown. That is a differentiator between him and some of these other guys, right?
Right.
So you look at a guy like Zach Ertz, and he only has 1,000. All the times he was peppered with targets with the Eagles, he only has 1,000 yards season. At age 28, he got 156 targets. He had 1,000 yards, right? That's the type of guy where he can create separation in the shallow area. He's an incredible route runner. He's got incredible body control. He has incredible hands, right? So he can garner those targets. And when he gets those targets, he can have high end upside, right? That's Jatavian Sanders to me, that type of player, where if he ends up somewhere where he doesn't get high quality targets, he doesn't get red zone chances, and he doesn't get peppered with targets, then he ends up having Hunter Henry esque seasons where Hunter Henry is very good in man to man. He can score. The Hunter finds the hen house pretty often considering the situation, right? He scores a lot of touchdowns,
Yeah.
but he hasn't yet had a scheme where he's getting a lot of targets. And that might change this year with Alex Van Pelt, who calls a lot of screens and calls a lot of, designed plays for tight ends. But Jatavian Sanders needs to land in a spot where he can be peppered with targets. If you were to go to the Chargers to be that Mark Andrews role, we'd have no choice but to move him up, right? But if he goes to some spot like the Dolphins, where they want to use him like an inline George Kittle, Dalton Schultz type role, he would have a decent floor because of how much they use the fullback. But they have two wide receivers that are obviously the top targets on the team in Waddle and Tyreek Hill. That might not be the best immediate short term spot for him. So we have to factor that in for some of these guys. Another guy that fits the mold that we talked about earlier in the slot type guy is Jaheim Bell. Now, did you want to weigh in on Javian Sanders, or should I just go through the three quick here?
No, no, no. I'm just looking for yours. And I have a little follow up, a non rookie related follow up because you mentioned the Dolphins. Um,
Right. So yeah, I mean, like, so for me, the next one would be that fits that would be
Jaheim Bell.
Jaheim Bell because and again, people say Jaheim Bell is too small, right? But you look at him next to Brock Bowers, right? Jaheim Bell is what 6'2", 241, right? And Brock Bowers is 6'3", 243. So what that one
Right.
inch and 2 pounds means this guy's too small. Not to mention Jaheim Bell has bigger hands at 10-inch hands. He's got longer arm length. He's got a longer wingspan. I don't see any noticeable difference in size from these two players. And a 4'6", 140 Gene Bell versus, the pro day for Brock Bowers, there's not a noticeable difference in speed. So if this
Right.
guy were to land in the right spot where I can look at it and say, this guy is as good, if not better, than the slot wide receiver on the team at catching the ball, and he's obviously a better blocker, then he could have a path like an Evan Ingram or Mark Andrews or that role. So we look for that as well, right? And then you got to mention, for me, there's a huge group of guys where depending on where they get drafted and where they go, they could be the next guy. You look at Ben Snott, you look at Theo Johnson, Kate Stover, whoever you want to talk about. But for me, Ben Snott is the guy that fits. Like he is it's hard to argue that he didn't have the best offseason here, right? Like where the interviews went well, the combine went well, the steam is hitting at the right spot, the production is there. He's probably the most well-rounded next guy for me. But again, if some team looks at because there's a lot of very similar guys in that range that could be two-way tight ends. Again, Theo Johnson, Case Over, all those guys. Whoever goes, if one guy goes in the second and Benson not goes in the fifth, that's where I think people are kind of losing sight of the reality to still have Benson not ranked ahead. And you might be right, but people buy $1 scratch tickets and win money on that all the time. It doesn't mean you're smart.
Right. So there's two things. Number one, I said Blake Sonat.
I know. I didn't want to. I figured
There
people
was
would figure it out.
There was a singer guitar player for a band called Rilo Kiley in the 2000s. His name is Blake Sennett, and
I don't
for
get that.
some reason that the other thing is one of the names that you didn't mention, who was a high production guy in college, following in Trey McBride's footsteps, even though he's older as a prospect. Dallin Holker from Colorado State. Does he fit into that group? Is he outside that group? His
Yeah.
production numbers, like his I mean, helmet scouting and looking at like his football card numbers, you can't really argue with the production that was there. But there are also a lot of red flags. So is
Right.
is
So
he
the problem for me, so here's what I like to do, and I've talked to a number of because again, because I'm so fantasy oriented and stat oriented, I go out of my way to speak to people that look at the game from a side that I don't look at. So
right?
I've spoken with Brandon Huffman, who is one of the. Are you familiar with Huff? Have you seen any of his stuff?
No,
So check out Brandon Huffman. He's at 247 Sports. He's got like 100,000 followers on Twitter. He kind of is one of the godfathers of the high school to college scouting, one of the great high school to college scouts, and he played tight end himself and has been the driving force, kind of behind guys like Luke Musgrave and he was fading Darnell Washington. And he is deep into what kind of character these guys have and what kind of dogs they are, kind of what what I mean, that kind of stuff, right? Like, so I talked to him. I also talked to Jake Butt. Jake Butt, you know him,
former Michigan tight end.
right, the gold standard of why some players are now sitting out the meaningless bowl games because he unfortunately just suffered a very serious knee injury as a top tight end prospect. Never really panned out, but now he's in the Big Ten Network, and he helps me. He helped me look at film from a film standpoint. I was very surprised to hear him talking about how don't like when you're trying to analyze these guys for film, he's like, don't worry so much about technique and form and things like that. He's like, because that can be coached. He goes, the things you want to look for, especially for fantasy in that standpoint, is look for guys that are making exceptional plays and putting in exceptional effort. Right. And you go back and watch George Kittle's college highlights, and it's like this guy is hurdling and spinning and jumping over guys, and Sam Laporta as well. And he's also, when he's got three guys surrounding him, he finds a way to find creases and get those first downs. And winning in versus man to man and things like that. And guys like, to bring it all around, to a guy like Dalian Holker, when you go and you watch what he was doing, he was basically just playing wide receiver for a team that didn't have good wide receivers. And a lot of it was kind of brute force, efficiency, and not really anything spectacular and exceptional. You know what I mean?
Right.
Basically just mismatches for a guy. And the thing for me is I was rooting for Holker, even though I didn't see much of that when I was watching him. I was rooting for him to, if he ran like a 4.6 at 6'3", 240, I'd be like, yeah. But he ran a 4.78. So
Yeah.
for me, unfortunately, those are the type guys, those tweener type guys that are most likely to end up being the next Cameron Brate or Anthony Firkser, where you can put them in as a slot tight end, but then they come out of the game and they end up playing like 40% of the snaps or 30% of the snaps and really making it so no tight end on the team is fantasy relevant the way Cameron Brate always did,
Right.
right? But Cameron Brate, Kylan Granson, like that, unfortunately, without the speed, he ends up being that type of guy for me. So,
The
that
kind of
is,
guy that winds up on NFL Network every Monday, that helps no one.
yeah. But for me, for my metrics and things I look for. So what I do is I go in and I want to know who is going to be who can line up at wide receiver? Who is a route runner? We look
Right.
at we look at who's playing slots at wide receiver and at slot, who is running high A dot routes, who's running a good percentage of their team routes, who is not being asked to pass block, because that's something that does translate. If sometimes the scheme isn't really a good fit, but like if these guys are pass catchers, especially in college where the talent outside of the top few teams is spread out more, if this guy is an NFL level pass catcher, you're not going to ever ask him to pass block in college because he should be one of the best pass catchers on your team. That's a massive red flag, guys that are being asked to pass block in college, because if they're being asked to pass block there, they're going to be asked to pass block at the next level. So like that's what I do, and then I go to guys like Huff and anybody, again, like Jake Butt, these guys, and try to have them on the show to tell me what they're seeing from the visual side, and then we bring it all together to these profiles. So, but yeah,
Right.
like Holker, I mean, unfortunately, doesn't he didn't pass some of the tests I need him to pass.
The upside isn't there. So just for you guys, like Mike and I don't talk a lot about tight ends on our show. And I did a lot of this when we were around the combine and we were talking about running backs, quarterbacks, and wide receivers and how their combine metrics correlate to fantasy performance. I just want to reiterate real quickly while I have Andrew here. According to Sumer Sports and their breakdown, 40 is the number one corollary to tight end performance in fantasy football. Broad jump is second, vertical jump is third, three cone and shuttle. So basically, you want to be fast and hyper athletic,
Right.
and then age comes, and then bench press, height, and weight are negative correlations. So really, what you want to be looking for, go back when you're prepping for your rookie draft. And you're looking for maybe a tight end in the third or the fourth round because somebody scooped up Brock Bowers with my number 3 pick. Go back and look at what their 40 time was at the combine, their broad jump, their vertical, their three cone drill, their shuttle, in that order, and also look at their landing spot
Mhm.
and kind of take all that into consideration.
Can I give you one more on top of it?
Yeah,
Look at
absolutely.
look at the extracurriculars. This absolutely translates, and it's funny, it's turned into like a meme where people kind of joke about it and dismiss it, but it's 100% factual. The basketball player tight end meme or whatever, oh, it's okay,
Hmm.
it's Jimmy Graham. That if you go in and look at the athleticism at some of these guys, that is huge. If you have a guy that can play basketball and is a big rebounder, right? Then those guys do translate. Mike Gesicki, if there was more money in it, could have been like according to people that in the know and that have kind of been following him, could have been one of the best like volleyball players in the world. He was an incredible volleyball player because with his vertical and everything. But there's no money in volleyball, so he's playing football. But like, go and look at these guys. Do they play basketball? Do they play baseball? Do they play other sports? Did they play quarterback and convert to tight end like Logan Thomas? Did they play wide receiver and convert to tight end? Like Darren Waller and a ton of these guys. Look at the path, man, because the path for a lot of these guys will tell you who they're going to be and what they're going to be. Now, there are exceptions. I'll give you one. George Fant, if
Hmm.
you look up, he's a offensive tackle in the NFL, right? If you look up his college stats, you know what you'll see? You'll see that he played basketball at, I believe, Eastern or Western Kentucky and was a forward. You would think that that guy would, and he was super skinny, dunking the ball. You would think that guy would translate as a pass catcher. He converted to tight end and then converted to offensive tackle. So it doesn't always go that way. Same with a guy like Darnell Washington. And that's maybe why the height and weight correlation with guys like Darnold Parham and Darnell Washington is negative because they end up being asked to block more. The
Right.
strong, the bench height, weight, the bigger, stronger you are, the more you're going to be asked to block because unlike in fantasy football, teams care deeply about blocking. It's why, when Mike McDaniel goes to the Dolphins and he wants to run the same scheme they run with the 49ers that uses a fullback, that uses a tight end to block, he chooses Durham Smythe over Mike Gesicki, even though Durham Smythe can't catch, at anywhere near an NFL caliber fantasy football level. Teams do care about that. So you got to be very careful.
There you go, talking about the Dolphins again. Spoiler alert, hang on with me, guys. All right, I do want to give a shout out to McAllen Castles. This guy has gone on a path from my area to my college teams, both of them. He went to Cal and then he transferred to UC Davis in my hometown where I'm at right now. Shout out Keelan Doss. Um, and then he goes to Tennessee to try and put
Good.
some tape together so that he can go into the NFL draft. And still nobody's talking about him except for
No.
me, because he's 26 years old
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's not very good. But he does have one really great touchdown highlight. So McAllen Castles, I wish the best for you. There are teams that I will draft you just because
His
I mean,
his name's come across my desk a couple times, so it's not just
yeah.
you. There's some whispers out there with the Castles. People saying, "Oh, snub from the combine, this and that." So,
Yeah, he didn't get to go to the combine.
no, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
he was on my list of combine snubs for sure when I was going
but
through and looking at it.
I do have, legacy rostering where I have Tucker Fisk on one of my teams or a couple of my teams. because I have to take the hometown guy. I have Alex Collins on one of my teams, and he's literally he passed away, but I have to, it's that legacy. Who's
The
another
guy
guy?
the guy like that for us was in my hometown league, the one I talked about on the previous show, the Wild Thornberries League, 25 years running. It was always tradition. Whoever had the very last pick in the draft would draft Anthony Sherman because we
Okay,
played with them growing up. Just freak
that's rad.
freak athlete. He came out as a freshman. He came out and scored 3 touchdowns in the Thanksgiving Day game at a good football school that never let freshmen play. It was like a rule: freshmen don't play varsity football, and they made an exception for this kid on Thanksgiving. He played with us all freshman year. Then Thanksgiving, they said, you know what, we got to beat Attleboro versus North Attleboro. We got to beat them. We're calling this
Oh, of
kid up.
course.
He scored 3 touchdowns in the Thanksgiving Day game, and then turned around and hit a home run on the very first pitch of the season for varsity baseball. They said, you know what, this kid's playing varsity. I mean, just the stories, and that's the thing is that the stories for these guys, like he's Massachusetts Gatorade Player of the Year. He pitched left-handed and right-handed in our alumni game. In sophomore year, he was walking to the gym, and the indoor track guys were practicing, and he picked up a shot put and threw it off the wall. They had like the thing set up, and he threw it off the wall. And they said the coach was like, "You literally don't have to practice." He goes, "Just come to the meets and throw." He still has the shot put record at North Attleboro High School, like just an absolute freakazoid. And then they get to the NFL, and it turns out everybody is on that caliber. So
Right,
he's a fullback and special teams player. It's just that speaks to the level that these guys are at. Like
right.
I played quarterback, and when we were passing the ball, my job would be we never had to pass because we had Anthony Sherman and we'd get every first down rushing it. It'd be if it was 3rd and 7, we'd run the ball. But if it was 3rd and 15, I would pitch it to Anthony. And if the wide side of the field was to the right, he would throw it rolling right, halfback pass. And if the wide side was left, I'd pitch it to him. He'd throw it with his left hand. That's how good this guy was. So freak
Yeah,
athlete.
my son was going to a school in Scarborough, Maine. It was kind of like a music program, half academic, half music. And he threw a ball in dodgeball, and the varsity baseball coach saw him and went, "You're coming out for the team." Throw for scouts in Boston and stuff like that. And he had a 90 lefty 92. 90, he was hitting between 91 and 93 for his scouting session. Not one ball in the strike zone. So
Yeah.
all right. So when we're talking about our rookie draft targets, are there 3 guys that nobody's talking about that you haven't mentioned yet that maybe like take a stab at in the 4th round?
For rookie tight ends, I mean, again, you got to wait and see. For me, like you have to wait and see on the draft capital. But my main thing is when I get deep in these drafts, is that I start looking at, to be honest, I'll start looking at guys that play wide receiver that could end up converting to tight end. And the big names were like Elijah Higgins last year, who is now he did convert to tight end. He's now with the Cardinals. I keep an eye on those guys because if they can develop those skills, then they could have a late breakout, right? So, I look at guys like Johnny, people talk about Johnny Wilson. He says he doesn't want to play tight end. That might be out of his hands. But for guys that actually do play tight end, there are so many of them that not enough people are talking about. I think number one for me that no one's talking about because he didn't go to the combine because he was hurt is Eric All. Now I'm not sure if you know much about this guy, but he
Hmm.
checks virtually every box. Again, Iowa tight end. So you got that going for you right there, the
Oh
tight
yeah,
end
yeah.
factory. Yeah. But he checks virtually every box that I look at when I do my spreadsheet and I color code everything from green to red in terms of yards per route run, lining up at wide receiver, success versus man to man, yards after the catch when he does have screens and does have plays in zone. So I think Eric All, if a team looks at him and says his knee is fine, then he's going to be very interesting to me. But again, with that group, the big differentiator is going to be where they get drafted. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at those guys that could convert to tight end, and then guys like Eric All, where if he was in the combine, we might be talking about him at tight end too. But instead, nobody's really talking about
Okay. So maybe I the question that I asked, I asked it incorrect incorrectly.
him. Oh,
Okay. What you brought up Johnny Wilson. and whether or not he switches to tight end. But when that comes down to it, and he says he doesn't want to, is it really just a matter of semantics? Because he can be called a tight end, and what he does on the field, is that really going to change much? I mean,
Oh yeah, I mean,
he's
well, that's the thing is that it's all about getting that designation for fantasy football. And
right.
the way it works is really it's about and the beautiful thing is that they're separated within the NFL both for contract purposes with the players association and within teams with the coaching staff. So the way it's going to
Got
end,
it.
the way it always ends up working is you show up to Saints camp and we hear word. So I'll give you an example of exactly how this went down one year is we get word that and so in fact the Saints are a perfect example of both sides. One year there was rumors that Marquise Colston could play tight end, right? And he gets drafted by the Saints and they make him a wide receiver. But because of those early rumors, Yahoo already gave him tight end eligibility. So for one year in Yahoo as a rookie, Marquise Colston was tight end eligible, even though he didn't play tight end, didn't work out with the tight ends, and he finished as the tight end one in PPR ahead of Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez. And I have a here right here. Thank you, Marquise Colston. I won my league because of that and bought a Marquise Colston jersey with the money that I won. So that can happen that way. The other thing is you want to pay attention and see what the team's doing. The moment that we heard that Nick Underhill tweeted that Juwan Johnson was sent to work out with the tight ends in camp and was not working out with the wide receivers, I turned around and took that and waited till they up to their website and I took those screenshots and I sent them to Yahoo and Sleeper. And I called the dogs on Reddit and got everybody in on it. And we were just blasting Sleeper, Yahoo, everyone to get that change to get him tight end eligibility. And then since then, he's had it. And he is a tight end because they categorize him as one, but he basically just plays slot. So if these guys, right. So if exactly, Mike Gesicki, God bless Mike Gesicki because he played 90% of his snaps at slot for the Dolphins with Changeli, and then the following year, and then they franchise tagged him as a tight end, and he didn't fight it. Now nobody can really fight it moving forward
Right.
because precedent has been set by Jimmy Graham and Mike Gesicki. So, ipso facto, if the team drafts Johnny Wilson and says you will practice with the tight ends and you will be a tight end, then we see that coming around and we add him in our rosters. And I personally will badger you. Tell me where you play. I will
Yeah.
personally badger them until it's changed. So there you
And
go.
that will change the dynamic.
It changes everything.
And a lot of people don't have an understanding of how powerful. Well, I don't want to say powerful. The effect of the NFLPA on situations.
Huge.
Everybody, because the narrative is one thing. So the narrative in the press every year in free agency season is, oh well, hometown discount, or is he going to take less to go here or whatever. The reality of the situation is they have basically bracketed contract structure, and if you play a specific position, there is literally a floor for how much you're going to get paid, and the ceiling, you have to be a top 5 player to bust through that, unless the team is completely willing to just throw you all of the money, which they're not, because they're a team and they don't want to
Right.
spend
Exactly.
all of their money. So
Yeah.
um, just one of those inside the game things. All right. Finally, uh, startup targets. Um, and I say finally, but I still haven't gotten to my Dolphins yet. Startup targets. Are you? Let me ask this. Okay. Let's picture a scenario in which in the 2023 season, Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce both play complete injury-free standard seasons. Sam Laporta is where?
I mean, so the thing with a startup draft is you're gonna have so many people that have different plans going in,
Well, no,
right?
no. But before the
Oh,
draft,
where
I'm
it
just saying,
finishes?
like,
Like where
as far as tight end rankings, imagine a scenario in which the top tight ends don't drop out of the top tight end
right.
space, and Sam Laporta was vaulted to tight end 1 because of all that. Um, how does that change the dynamic? I mean, I'm looking at this at the tight ends in my startup draft, and I'm like, there's no reason for me to believe that Sam Laporta is would have been the tight end one if those two guys had normal seasons last year.
Exactly, and I'm a big tight end Sam Laporta fan. I mean,
Me too.
I have a stack of Sam Laporta cards right here, dude, right next to me. You know, I'm looking
Jared
at
Goff and I share a hometown, so
there it is, Sammy,
yeah,
Sammy right
love
there.
him.
Another one. You know, people ask who are these like joint, you know, Kyle Pitts and Pat Fryermuth cards for? They're for me. That's
You. Right, right.
who are they making these for? They make for me.
Yeah.
I'm the one buying those. Like, yeah, give me all like the weird tight end cards. I'm in. That's what I collect, the tight end cards. So, but with Sam Laporta, like I'm a huge fan, but he had 52 yards a game last year. Like in his rookie year, Kyle Pitts had 187 more yards than Sam Laporta. And where I was getting to is that for me personally, when I go into a startup draft, I'm playing to win. That's just the way that I play fantasy. I've had a lot of success uh, just playing to win every time when I go into a draft. And the one of the realities that people don't like to hear is, and again, it might come off as arrogant or cocky or whatever, but in the vast majority of fantasy leagues that I've been in dynasty leagues, the good players, the good fantasy players that care the most and put in the most effort, they stay good. They stay good,
Right.
and the bad teams stay bad. That's just you're going to have that dynamic to a certain degree. And think about your league and your friends. And if you don't feel that to be true, you might be one of the people that is just bad. But if you're listening to this show, you're probably good, and you probably
Right.
sit there and you're like, "Oh yeah, my buddy Drew is not. He's just the guy in our league that's not good. And there's guys that aren't good, and maybe everybody's sharp in your league. And you have an incredible league, and that's going to be very difficult. But for the most part, for me, I play to win. So for me, I look at it right now and I say, at ADP, my top targets from the top crew, I will draft Mark Andrews as my number one target. I think that he can be, he has the, besides Travis Kelce, has the best shot at being the tight end one this year. He already has a top five tight end season of all time. The offense is built around him playing 85% of his snaps at wide receiver. They didn't add any tight end, wide receivers in free agency. And unless they go crazy adding another wide receiver, it would that would dramatically change things. I don't think that happens. They use a fullback, which highly consolidates the targets, and he's 28 years old. I talked about earlier. Zach Ertz had his first 1,000-yard season at 28 years old.
Hmm.
Travis Kelce had his first 1,000-yard season at 27 years old. There's a possibility that Mark Andrews, maybe, you know, people say, oh, he's injury prone, or you know, he's a type 2 diabetic, or all these things. But there's a possibility that this guy just continues for the next 2, 3, 4 years to be one of the best tight ends in the league, which is what he is. So that's the kind of guy I'm going after. Evan Ingram, if it's full PPR and especially tight end premium, I will go after that guy. Of
Hmm.
course, if I get a good value on McBride, Kincaid, or Pitts, guys that I believe, or Laporta, guys that I believe are both can be top five tight ends in PPR and also are very young, then I'll take the values on them if I can get it. But I don't like paying a premium because I know I can piece it together and I know we can find these guys off waivers and we go out of our way to find them off waivers, right? Mark Andrews wasn't even the top tight end drafted by his own team. George Kittle was picked in the fifth round because they took CJ Beathard in the third, and CJ Beathard was George Kittle's college roommate. You know what I mean? Like Logan Thomas was a quarterback that was drafted by the Cardinals to play quarterback. Darren Waller was drafted by the Ravens to play wide receiver and he flamed out and came back. Like these guys come out of the woodwork. There are high end guys you can go after, but we can find them later. So I'm either going to, if I can get a good price on an elite guy, I'm doing that. If I can get an Andrews or an Ingram at ADP, I will do that. Kelsey at ADP. And then I skip the whole middle. And you know, we can talk about later targets as well if you'd like. But I skip the whole middle of guys that I don't think are going to be top two targets on their team or aren't in a good situation. And that includes TJ Hawkinson. That includes Dallas Goddard and David Njoku and Jake Ferguson and Cole Kmet and George Kittle. I'm sorry, but like TJ Hawkinson, for instance, like what's the plan? What's the plan with TJ Hawkinson? He's probably the third target on the team after Justin Jefferson and Jordan Madison, right? He just lost Kirk Cousins, who throws for 267 yards a game, top five since he's come in the league, and they're going to start like Sam Darnold or a rookie. And whatever the new quarterback's going to be, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison get on the same page with that guy while TJ Hawkinson rehabs from a torn up knee. I'm just not
Right.
going to do it. So I'm that whole miss me with that whole middle of the pack. and then I start taking stabs on later guys if you want to talk about
So, uh, is Tucker Craft the impediment to Luke Musgrave having a top 12 season?
no, the impediment to Luke Musgrave having a top 12 season is him being top 12 is entirely possible. But got to remember how top heavy Dynasty is. What exactly does a top 12 tight end do for you, right?
Spike weeks.
But in best ball, great. Spike Week's amazing, right? But in a redraft or in a dynasty league where again you have people doing productive struggles and tanking, you look at the top teams and everybody on those teams is good. And the difference maker can often be who has because everybody has good running backs and wide receivers. And they have a bench full of them too. The difference maker can honestly be a lot of cases who has difference making quarterbacks, difference making tight ends, difference making defenses. That can obviously mean the difference a lot of times. So for me, if I'm playing to win, I don't care if my tight end is 8 or 9 or 10. If I have the tight end 10 and I project him to be the tight end 10 and I am trying to win my league, I consider myself in need of a new tight end. So Luke
Okay.
Musgrave, unless I think he could be a top 2 target on the team, which with Christian Watson and Romeo Dubs and Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, I don't think that's the case. You
And
know,
Bo Melton.
and Malik Heath, like literally
And Josh Jacobs. Yeah.
just so many good pass catchers. And Tucker Craft, I still have Luke Musgrave ahead. I've argued with Wiz about this, and with Jax is obviously such a staunch tight ends need to be able to block guy. But for me, I look at go back to the tight end room equation where Luke Musgrave won the job. He's the better pass catching tight end, and he plays out of the slot, right? And if you're going to play both tight ends, when you look at Dallas Goedert versus Zach Ertz, who's going to have their hand in the dirt and who gets to play slot? You're never going to have Zach Ertz in the slot as the inline tight end with Goddard in the slot, and you're never going to have Luke Musgrave playing in line so that Tucker Craft can play slot. So that's the case. Not to mention, you go back and look at Tucker Craft, and he did nothing for 8 weeks. He had 2 targets for 8 weeks. And then when Luke Musgrave got hurt, Christian Watson got hurt, and Dontavian Wicks got hurt, and Jaden Reed missed a game, and Romeo Dubs left the game because he was coughing up blood. Then all of a sudden, he got 6 targets in a couple games, maxed out at 6 targets. So for me, Tucker Craft, maybe he will be the guy. And his Tucker Craft's brother, his older brother was yelling at me on Twitter for saying this the other day. But as of now, Luke Musgrave's the guy over Tucker Craft for me, and that's the way it's going to stay until they trade one of them or one of them leaves.
Okay. Next one is, will Cade Otton ever reach his ceiling?
I was so excited about Cade Otton when I heard that Mike Evans could be gone, and then they signed him to come back, right? So Cade Otton, you saw the flashes, right? Chris Godwin hurts his neck in week 8, and Cade Otton gets more targets because now it's Mike Evans and Cade Otton, and Chris Godwin's got a hurt neck, right? And then Chris Godwin comes back and gets 10 and 11 and 12 targets, and Cade Otton goes back on the back burner. Now, in individual weeks where this is great in best ball, Cade Otton can do what he did in the playoffs, which is teams will be all over Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and they go to the path of least resistance, which is Cade Otton. And that's great in best ball. But for redraft and for dynasty, we need him to be a top 2 target on the team. And with Mike Evans getting 2 years, 52 million, and Chris Godwin still being there, that can't happen yet. So if Mike Evans were to leave, we would have moved Cade Otton way up. But until that happens, we can't do it. Can't do it.
All right. And then lastly, and I'm going to finally get to my Dolphins question. And I think all the viewers at this point, if you've been following along, can answer this question for themselves. Does Jonnu Smith have a path to fantasy relevancy in 2024?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, if you can't be a top 2 target on the team, and again, there are a lot of deeper formats where people have tight end premium and multiple flexes and all these things. If you can't be a top 2 target on the team, we want the targets to be highly consolidated. How do we get there? You want as many guys on the field as possible that aren't threats to soak up targets, right? So you look at the 49ers and what they do. Kyle Juszczyk playing 50% of the snaps and not getting many targets is the best possible thing for Ayuk and Debo and CMC and Kittle, right? It consolidates the targets. You want as many blocking tight ends and fullbacks on the field as possible. And now the Dolphins with Alec Ingold he plays 40% of the snaps.
Raiders
So
legend Alec Ingold.
Raiders legend Alec Ingold playing 40% of the snaps, and Durham Smythe is out there not catching any passes, which is great for Jalen Waddle and great for Tyreek Hill. If Johnny Smith can earn that George Kittle role, he will be valuable in best ball. And now he'll be a handcuff plus or handcuff plus plus like Dallas Goedert, where if either of the wide receiver gets hurt, now he can be a top 2 target on the team. Dallas,
And let's be
yeah,
honest, it's Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. It's when one of them gets hurt.
when one of them gets
Um,
hurt. Exactly.
yeah.
And the thing is, that's why with the fullback usage and the 2 tight ends, that's why you ask yourself why Braxton Berrios can't be a guy, or why Juwan Jennings can't be a guy, or why the Ravens have never had a wide receiver 3 you could trust. It's because Patrick Ricard, like the moment in Dynasty, I see a team say they're going to heavily use a fullback, I take the wide receiver 3 and I put him into the trash.
Okay, so that actually, and I hadn't thought of this. Juwan Johnson. I mean, really, when we look at the wide receiver core of the Saints, we have Chris Olave and maybe Rashid Shaheed. A.T. Perry is a guy that I
Mhm.
like, but Juwan Johnson had Jimmy Graham kind of like put a wrinkle in everything. Derek Carr has a history of creating 1,000-yard tight end. Um, Juwan Johnson possibility.
And here's so Juwan Johnson, and we talk about volatility, right? I had some tweets that I was like, Tajay Spears is the most Tajay Spears and Rochon Johnson are the most volatile people going into free agency because if they do nothing, they could be top dogs. If they bring in someone, they could get vaporized and be stuck under contract for 3 years. Juwan Johnson is in an incredibly volatile situation because of that exact situation. We just talked about the 49ers and the Dolphins and the Texans that now use, and the Texans brought in Andrew Beck to play fullback. They now use that 49ers offense, right? The Saints just brought in Clint Kubiak, right? Who comes over from the 49ers and uses
Right.
a two-way inline tight end. So to your point, if Juwan Johnson can carve out a role as a wide receiver, like a full-time wide receiver, then the upside's huge for the team that is potentially going to use a fullback and potentially do that stuff. If they go out and get a two-way tight end, then he could be in big trouble. So Juwan Johnson, we could see the value go way up, could see it go way down this offseason.
Okay, so in the yin and yang situation, right now we are in we have the 17-10 coming up, and we were basically we're in this expert draft with the undroppables guys,
Yeah.
and Mike Lindbergh and I have a team together, and we are putting together a show that's going to go through all of our draft picks and everything. But for now, I'll just say we are using the Adam Harstad ADP fallers method. Basically, everybody that we're taking is falling, so we're not getting the guy. Our first tight end off the board was Musgrave
Good.
at the 12. So right now, we're looking at being able to take another tight end in the 17th round, because what we're looking at is the value of rookie picks, and so they're folded into this. So we're taking rookie picks instead of actually, and we're going to have a supplemental rookie draft. All right, all that to say, uh, so far in the 17th round, we still have Juwan Johnson, Dawson Knox, Taysom Hill, Hunter Henry, Tyler Conklin, Jelani Woods, and Jonnu Smith on the board.
Mm-hmm.
We can wait. We can let any of them fall to pair with Luke Musgrave, or should we grab 3 or 4 of them?
Now, do you want to even attempt to compete right now? Like, are you
Uh,
doing like a productive struggle type situation? Are you doing a full on tank? Like you don't want to win now? Like where are
no,
you at?
in our startup, we have been set on
Collecting value. Collecting value.
collecting value, and
Give me some names that you got. Like who's your oldest player?
Tyreek.
Yeah. Okay. So you can win now. All right. So the player I would 100% take with a bullet is Hunter Henry. I would
Okay.
take Hunter Henry, and here's why. Because Hunter Henry has always had the ability. First of all, Hunter Henry went to Arkansas, so that scores some points with you, right?
Woo Pig Suey.
Yeah. So naturally, he could kill a boar with his bare
Also,
hands.
shout out Britt.
Yeah. Shout out Britt. Shout out the gang. Traylon Burks. Shout out Frank Ragnow. But so he has always had the ability to win in man to man, which translates no matter what. It translates huge in the red zone. When everyone goes zero lockdown coverage, he can win in man to man, even with poorly thrown targets. That's why he still has multiple touchdown games, which is fantastic, right? The thing is he doesn't have long speed, so he needs a lot of targets, right? And he hasn't had that recently. With the change this year, you bring in Alex Van Pelt, right? And he's going to design the offense like he did for the Browns. He's going to call the plays. He didn't call the plays with the Browns. Kevin Stefanski did, but the offense he designed and the play calls with the Browns, David Njoku and the Browns as a team called the second most tight end screens of any team in the league, only behind Doug Peterson. Evan Engram got 21 tight end screens. Last year, David Njoku got 20. That is the kind of boost that you need. Guess how many tight end screens the Patriots called last year?
15.
Zero. Not a single one. Not a single one, bro. They had Mike Gesicki. You had Mike Gesicki. You have Hunter Henry. They called not one. They didn't call a single one. So like that, that's like the bread and butter. That's what gives Dallas Goedert the floor he has. Is that Nick Sirianni likes tight end screens, right? So when you bring in a guy that's going to give this guy manufactured automatic PPR touches to a guy that already can score in red zone situations, and then you look around at his target competition, and it's Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas, which we like Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas. We definitely like Demario Douglas. Pop is a fun player, but
Mhm.
do you look around and see a guy like CeeDee Lamb that deserves 150 targets? And even Jake Ferguson next to him got 100, but none of those guys are getting 150 targets. Devontae Parker's gone, so who's the next best red zone threat? Tyquan Thornton as a field stretcher is not getting 120 targets. So even if you were to pick one of those guys and allocate 120 targets to Demario Douglas, there's a lot of targets there, you know. So and they're going to get a quarterback upgrade. They have one automatically with Jacoby Brissett, right, who's better than Mac Jones. So Hunter Henry right now is in a position where he can compete right away, and he's still what 28, 29 years old, which at tight end, you still got some years, man. So of that group, Hunter Henry right now, like he's basically him and Fryermuth are the kind of guys where if I wait, my list, I made a little list of like guys I wait on. You already grabbed Musgrave, right? So just give yourself a shot at opportunity and upside. You take Henry here. Now, is Dulcich still available? Is he
No,
still floating?
he just went.
Yeah, he just went. Okay. With a very late pick, here's a stab. People, on Twitter I said this and they got very upset. But there's so many people right now saying, uh, what if Darren Waller retires? Right. And to what I say, well, what if he doesn't? Right. Like last year, he was getting 6 targets a game. He got 74 targets in 12 games. If he doesn't retire and decides to play, he could come out and he's being in even in best ball, he's tight end 32. I'm sure in your startup draft, he's not even being he's tight end a million, right?
He was the 17-1.
He already got picked?
Yeah.
What the heck? Who picked
He
him?
went right after Noah Fant.
Wow. Noah Fant? Who the hell is taking Noah Fant? Like
Chalk.
Noah did, did the draft start before? I love chalk, dude. Did the draft start before free agency? Because
uh, a week ago.
he signed himself up to be behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba. We ask ourselves what the path is to being a top 2 target on the team. How many injuries away is Noah Fant? Like, I know the idea is okay, they got rid of Shane Waldron, who's going to rotate tight ends, and they got rid of, uh, you know, um, Will Disley and they got rid of Colby Parkinson. But he signed up to be the 4th best pass catcher on the team. That sounds terrible for fantasy football.
Right.
Why couldn't he go to the Chargers instead of Will Disley? That would have been amazing for fantasy football, right? So yeah, who else? Give me some deeper names just real quick. I love doing this.
That's what I'm looking at right now.
Cole
Juwan
Turner,
Johnson,
Cole Turner is still there.
he's got to be. I love him, and I love Logan Thomas, but Thomas doesn't have a team. Um,
Cole
going deep,
Turner. Look at Cole Turner. Like Zach Ertz was the starting tight end for the Cardinals. People
there he
forget
is.
Zach Ertz was on pace for over 100 targets again. Zach Ertz got hurt, and Trey McBride took his job and did it better. And Zach Ertz asked to be out. That could happen with Cole Turner. Cole Turner is a converted wide receiver. In fact,
Right.
there's only one tight end that's like ever been on Washington. That's like Washington has embraced the idea that you don't need a tight end that's a tight end. John Bates is the only one that played tight end in college that's been through Washington the last few years. Logan Thomas was a quarterback. Cole Turner was a wide receiver. Isaiah Hodge was a wide receiver. Armani Armani Rogers was a wide receiver, or he was a quarterback. Tyree Jackson, like they're just not drafting actual tight ends except John Bates. So yeah, give me Cole Turner. Who else floating around out there? It was
Conklin's there. Bellinger's there as
never
a
Conklin. Bellinger, kind of interesting.
Waller handcuff.
George
Uh,
Kittle, did they ask George Kittle who are some breakout tight ends? And he named some obvious names, and he also named Daniel Bellinger.
yeah, I saw that within the last week or so. Brevin Jordan's still there, who I had high hopes for, but he's down the depth chart now.
How many rounds is
Um,
this?
Brenton Strange, we're looking at 36,
Okay. At
and
some point,
it's a half point tight end premium too.
so I've mentioned this name on shows with Jax, on show Wiz definitely knows the name, so be careful. He will in 36 rounds. He might get drafted. Keep an eye on Stone Smart.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Charger.
Converted. So he played quarterback in high school. He converted to wide receiver. Then he converted to tight end. Both of his parents. He grew up out your way, I believe, out in Cali. Both of his parents were like all division college basketball players. And his middle name is Cole, Stone Cole Smart. So
That's
he
pretty
check
cool.
he checks every tight end meme box, my boy.
I don't see him. Hang on.
Two T's on Smart.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. Okay. Um, what about Albert Okwabunum?
I wanted Albert O to go to I wanted the Pats to, if they're gonna move on for Hunter Henry, go for like a Noah Fant or a Albert O to try and replicate what Alex Van Pelt did with David Njoku as athletic tight ends. Alberto ran like a 4.5 40, but the way he's been treated, unfortunately, as of late, doesn't
Practice squad
bode.
guy.
Yeah, it doesn't bode well for
Yeah.
him. He's stuck with the Eagles, you know. Yeah. Who else?
Yeah, and
Any other names floating
behind
around?
Dallas Goddard. Uh, well, just to give you some, in the last few rounds, in order: Darren Waller, Noah Fant. This is order going backwards: Chig, Otten, Dulcich, Likely, Schultz, Kraft. Those all went in rounds 14 through 17.
Yeah. So in the deepest rounds, I'm looking for just give me a shot on athleticism of any kind. So we want
Right.
quarterbacks, converted wide receivers, especially the narrative with those guys, you know, is twofold that they got to learn the position, right? Uh, and look at guys that there are blocking tight ends on the team and they skew pass catching. So going
Okay.
through for like deep later round guys, I'm sure Isaiah likely already went, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about Likely. Like, when is he likely to hit?
Hey, yeah. So for him, he falls into the same category as Ertz Ertz and Henry and Sanders, where he doesn't have the long speed, but he's got the pass catching chops. So he just needs. I mean, if Andrews goes down, I'm willing to start that guy right away in my leagues. I mentioned that before. So you just got to wait on it, man. You got to wait for the split. Like Dallas Goddard and Ertz were stuck together. Vernon Davis and and Delaney Walker. So you got to wait for them to split teams. I also kind of like Charlie Kohler from that team. So when I go through and I look at these teams and I ask myself, who's deep on the depth chart that is a primary pass catcher, it's not going to get stuck as a blocker. I look at, and this is for like very late rounds for your draft. I look at Lucas Kroll on the Denver, Kroll, Warrior King, pure
Mhm.
pass catching tight end. I look at I look at Will Mallory. I look at Will Mallory on the Colts, and he has purely been used in a pass catching role. Kylan Granson could be a cap casualty. I look at, I mentioned Stone Smart. I look at, Zach Kuntz, Kenny Yaboa, guys for the Jets that like they could take time to develop, but are high pass catching ability guys. I like Chigakonkwo, but Josh Wiley, if he doesn't pan out, Josh Wiley. I mentioned Elijah Higgins, right behind Trey McBride as he's converted from wide receiver, right? So we're getting real deep in the weeds. I mean,
There are so many tight
yeah,
ends in Andrew Cooper's brain.
Shane Zilstra. I mean, like now you're talking like very, 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 very deep leagues. But that's about it. I guess the last one I would mention is behind George Kittle. they kind of let the veterans leave. So behind George Kittle, they always had a pass catching guy and a blocking guy in case Kittle went down, and they
Mm.
would bring in the blocking tight end. The pass catcher was Jesse. Oh man, now I'm spacing on the two names there, but they let him. Charlie Warner was the blocker, and the pass catcher was the other guy there. But they let them both walk, and now they have two tight ends behind them. Braden Willis is the
And,
blocker.
and Cameron Latu.
Cameron Latu. See, there you go. You're back
Yeah.
in. Now you're back. Cameron Latu would be he would be the next up as a pass catcher behind George Kittle.
Okay,
That that
I had him and I took him in rookie drafts last year.
that's the deepest. That's the deepest we go. That's the
Okay,
deepest we go.
so we have a tight end strategy now. How many of them would you trade straight up for a third or fourth round rookie pick?
I would rather have the rookie pick in every case.
Right. So right now we're at the point where we're still getting the third round rookie picks and the fourth round rookie picks.
Yeah. So
So
we're talking. You pick 17. We're talking round 30 guys here. So you fourth round picks as well. Take before these guys, all of them.
okay, and so wait once the draft picks are dry, then I'm going to start going at Hunter Henry, and I'm taking Stone Smart. I don't care what happens now.
Yeah, I would prioritize Hunter Henry because he's the only one. He's the only guy you mentioned that legitimately, and I'm not kidding when I say this. And people called me stupid when I said it about Evan Ingram 2 years ago when he was going off the board at tight end like 2025. And Hunter Henry legitimately has top 5 upside in his range of outcomes this year. This
Okay.
year, if they draft a quarterback at 3, and that quarterback is awesome, and the pass catchers are Demario Douglas and whoever else, Hunter Henry could score 10 touchdowns. He could get 90 targets.
They're drafting JJ McCarthy and everybody knows it. So
And well, if they do it, dude, then even better because he's just like your meat and potato. JJ McCarthy is the most meat and potatoes, throw it to the tight end type guy I think there is, right? So like Hunter Henry, that's all it takes. 90 targets for 10 touchdowns, and it's well within his range of outcomes.
okay. And we're at the point now where Juwan Johnson has fallen enough that we can draft that he's draftable for us. And
Sure.
Hunter Henry, he's ADP, where'd he go? 210. So we have a couple more rounds and hopefully he doesn't
Careful with ADP. Careful with ADP.
go. Well, I mean that's what we're doing is taking ADP values and so people can go get them. That's fine. But if their ADP is lower, the only ADPs the only guys that we've drafted that exceeded their ADP, well, the only one was Dak Prescott, and then Jalen Hurts we got at 3. So,
yeah, of course.
All right. So real quickly, thank you guys for watching. This has been the Dynasty Pulse with Biggs and Greinberg. Greinberg's not here. We're going to flip over to the Undroppables Unveiled Debbie Talk. That'll be a very short show, but stick around with us. And thank you, Andrew Cooper, for coming on with us.